Hello, this is Heidi Vaughn. What you are about to see is a collector talk at Heidi Vaughn Fine Art in Houston, Texas. The conversation is between collector Andy Moran and Dr. Alvia Wardlaw. The talk took place as part of our exhibition, The Andy Moran Collection, John Biggers and Friends, a show of secondary market art from the private collection of Andy Moran. Andy Moran is a bohemian retired investment banker and real estate investor with deep ties at Texas Southern University. Many of the objects featured here were acquired by Andy directly from the artists themselves, and most have never been seen publicly before. Dr. Alvia Wardlaw is one of the top experts on African American art in the country. She is the curator and director of the University Museum of Texas Southern University. She is also a member of the Advisory Council of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, part of the Smithsonian Institution. She is formerly a longtime curator of modern and contemporary art at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. Dr. Wardlaw has organized more than 75 exhibitions of African American art, including solo shows of Dr. John Biggers and Kermit Oliver, both of whom are represented in the Andy Moran collection, John Biggers and Friends. Andy and Dr. Wardlaw are lifelong friends with a shared passion for art. The two talked about the personal relationships they have enjoyed with the artists whose works are featured. The talk gives unique insight into the personal and colorful relationships that Andy and Dr. Wardlaw have enjoyed with the artists featured in the exhibition. Please enjoy.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Hattie.
Well, Andy,
Yes,
first of all, I bring you greetings from my father.
I love him.
I know, he loves you. And when I told my 95-year-old dad that I was going to have a conversation with Andy, he said, "Tell him I have always admired his selections." And we spent several afternoons in Andy's home, and my father would sit and read the books, just pouring through his books. So that, for me, was wonderful
Yes.
because he was focused and he knew that we were going to have a great time.
That
But he
means
wanted-
that means a lot to me. He came over about a year ago, and Alvia was ready to go. He says, "Alvia, I'm reading Andy's books. I'm not ready to go." And I gave him a book not long ago.
Lulu,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
right.
But
And we
he's a
looked
beautiful
at-
man. I appreciate that,
Yes,
Alvia. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So let's start off at an obvious point. How did you start collecting? When did you start collecting?
Well, what's interesting is when I think back, going to high school, was at Phyllis Wheatley, and it's interesting, we never really even had a discussion as to who Phyllis Wheatley was, even at Phyllis Wheatley, you know. Then I ended up going to prep school at Mount Carmel, and I was there in an art class by Sister Kevin. Took art, and I wanted to be an artist, and I used to doodle and draw, and I still do cartoons and what have you. But even in that aspect, as learning how to draw, and there was never really an exposure to African American art. When I think back, I was from Wheatley, from E.O. Smith, until I got to Texas Southern University. Texas Southern University was a beautiful experience. I met my wife on the steps of the library, and she said, "If you're going to date me, boy," call me a boy, "you're going to have to meet me in the library every day, because that's where I work." And I was there before she got there every day. And she exposed me to literature. Of course, I had Milton and Homer in high school, and when I met Mary Lou, she introduced me to Tolstoy, and we read Anna Karenina, and we read War and Peace, and we read Ralph Ellison, and we read Faulkner and Steinbeck, and we read Gwendolyn Brooks, which she met later on in life. But then she took me over to the art school, which was a whole nother world, the art school at Texas Southern University, which is probably one of the finest art schools in America. And when you think about it, we walked around that campus looking at these sculptures, which we didn't even know who he was, which was Carroll Simms, the co-founder of the art department at Texas Southern University. These massive sculptures, which are still standing there today. So she takes me over there to the art department. She was a student in art also. Mary
Really?
Lou.
I
Yeah,
didn't know
yeah,
Mary Lou
she
had
liked
taken
art.
art class.
And I walked in there, and because it was the second year at Texas Southern, Mary Lou was a year ahead of me, so my brother was already in the art school. And I walked in there, and it was like a reverence in that place with Dr. Biggers and Carroll Simms and the students' intensity that they had in terms of what was being given there. And I'm like, this is crazy. And I met Anthony Haynes, which probably done one of the greatest paintings of all time, The Last Supper, which Elijah Muhammad was the Messiah. I'm sure Anthony may own it himself because I've never seen it displayed again. You've probably seen it.
I've seen it, but yeah,
Beautiful
it's
piece
not-
of work. Oliver Parsons, which was Kermit's most famous artist, was Oliver Parsons. And then Joe was there, and Kermit, and Harry Vidal, and
Renfro.
Renfro. You know, you can go on and on and on. And these were all really great artists, you know, right there at Texas Southern, across the track in that little building, which is still there. And today it's one of the finest art institutions in America or the world. And the students that come through here. So my show here was about bringing some of these people out who participated in that particular process. And so Mary Lou brought me over there. She introduced me to Thelonious Monk, which I wasn't familiar with him. Her mother was working in River Oaks, where we sit here in River Oaks today. Her mother was working at the home of someone in River Oaks who was a personal friend of George Wine, who did the Cool Jazz Festival, the Wine Jazz Festival. And Mary Lou said, Andrew, I got 2 tickets to see Thelonious Monk. Who's Monk? I didn't even know who Monk was. You don't know who Monk is? You know. And that's crazy too, because ironically, 40 years later, my middle son does a tribute to Monk at Town Hall in New York. You know, we sit on the front row. You know, it's crazy.
So I want to ask
Yeah.
you about that. My next question. And it's interesting that Mary Lou was your guide through all of this. That says so much that she was the one that introduced you to all of these aspects of African American art and culture right there at TSU.
Right.
But if you wouldn't mind, could you just talk about the environment that you and Mary Lou created for yourselves and your sons? I see
Okay.
Kai right there. Your grandchildren. Just what the richness of all of that involves, because it's no accident that Jason Moran is your son. You know, the environment that you created for your children, I think, has a great deal to do with, it goes beyond your collecting.
You know, Alvia, I had 100 people out here last week, and it's interesting you asked that question, because I discussed how growing up with art, it meant so much hearing David Driscoll about the beauty of HBCUs and the beauty of waking up in your home every day with art. I was telling Heidi earlier today, when I wake up in my house every day, I just look around and they talk back to you, the art. So I exposed my kids to art because Mary Lou and I were personal friends of Kermit and Katie. And my kids grew up with art. They grew up with music. And you're right, it's no accident that the prominence of where Jason is, to being a MacArthur Genius, artistic director for the Kennedy Center, to sell out Carnegie Hall, to
Not to mention his own compositions.
his own compositions, yeah, compositions, Whitney Museum, Walker Art Museum, friends with Adrian Piper, friends with Richard Serra, you know, that's no accident. Well, what we gave them was a lot of love at home and a lot of structure. There was always books, it was always art. I had a niece came by my home many years ago with her two sons. They're both in college now. And those kids were unruly. I said, you must leave because you can't pay for anything they break in my home, you know. And I showed them to the door. And you know I did.
I know you did.
I showed them to the door. And thank you very much for coming, but don't come back, you know. But my grandkids today, this is my youngest grandson back here, Sevi, and I have little triplets that are age 10, Maceo, Eli, and Margot. And they're all musicians. They're piano player, guitar, and artist. Margot's a very famous artist to me. And when they come to the house, I remember one day Maceo was just, Maceo was just staring at this piece.
This one right here.
Just staring at it. So what's going on, Maceo? I said, Pops, it's beautiful. You know, this is a 10-year-old kid, you know, you say, I just love that piece, Pops. I just love it, just staring at it, you know. And before they leave my home, they'll look at the table like Dr. Wardlaw looked at the books, and he was into that book with the Louvre. I said, okay, Margot, you pick up Caravaggio. Maceo, you pick up Titian. And Eli, you pick up John Biggers. And in 15, 20 minutes, I want you to come back and tell me what you know about Caravaggio, Titian, and John Biggers. And they'll sit there, and I'll leave them for 20 minutes, come back in the room, and they'll each tell me what we know about Titian, what we know about Tintorero, what we know about John Biggers. It was back to the question the lady asked at the Driscoll thing. What do we do? We can't depend on the school system to give the kids what they need today. We have to do it.
Right.
You know, so I think it's beautiful that I look forward. I remember Margot told me, Pops, I want you to drink more water. I want you to exercise and eat better and get more sleep. I said, why, Margot? Because when I'm 18, I'm going to Berkeley School of Music like my big sister and get me a scholarship, and I want you to be there.
Wow. Can you talk about Raven?
Yeah,
Just for a
well,
second
Raven
before
is that Raven, my oldest granddaughter. I got 10 grandkids, 4 granddaughters, 6 sons. Raven is the full scholarship at Berkeley School of Music in jazz guitar. She was the top jazz guitarist in the state of Texas, male or female. And she'll be, amazingly, a senior next year. So, you know, so I think, you know, the exposure would go back to Driscoll. Like I told you that night, it was a rich night.
It was. I
It was
don't know, were any of you all there?
You
At
were
the
there, you were
Driscoll
lucky
talk?
to be there.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
we all
it
felt,
was.
whoever was there, and there wasn't a lot of people there, we felt like that was a monumental experience
was.
to be there with Mr. Driscoll. But he talked about the beauty of what we need to do to continue the legacy of art and music. And so I gave the kids that, you know, and even though I was on my own journey of doing what I had to do to survive. You know.
And that's again what makes all of this very, very special. You know, what you celebrate within your own family, and it emanates, you know, among all of us. So I want, getting back to your collection, it's like talking about your children. Can you just share with us, in this particular portion of your collection, which works resonate with you the most, or which one? And I know that's hard.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I had this question to me last week, and I pointed to the Edsel Cramer on the wall back there as a favorite piece.
The portrait of the young
Portrait of the
man
young man who we don't know who he is.
who looks like
And the
your
reason
godson.
I got it, because he reminds me of Jason's twin boys, of which they will look like this kid as they get older. But when you ask me a specific question of what's the favorite, all of them mean a lot to me. You know, they all mean a lot, because when I look at a young Jade Cooper on the wall in this ornate frame, it means a lot. Then I remember Julian Kyle, when I got him right out of college, these massive pieces by Julian Kyle.
Now, Julian was one of the first art majors who started this painting on wood.
Yeah,
You know,
plywood,
many
yeah.
of these have come out of TSU graduate, but he was the one that got dragged the first piece of plywood into and said, this will work, you know,
Right,
and then
right.
suddenly, and it's still going on.
Yes.
You see
Yeah,
next
Robert Pruitt, yeah.
generations, right. Of,
But when we,
artists who do that.
but when we start talking about the pieces, of course, I started with Kermit. That was our first piece of art
Was it?
that Mary Lou and I purchased was a Kermit Oliver, you know. And I never bought art with the fact that it was going to be appreciable to major numbers, which is where things are trading today. They were all purchased on the basis of what I liked, you know, what my wife liked. You know, it was, we both had the eye for particular things. So we started with Kermit, and then I was on Wall Street doing that craziness for 22 years, and my brother came to me and said, man, you're buying all these damn cars. Yeah, well, you need to buy art. And Earlie Hudnall did too, which is also in this show, photographs on the back. And I went to visit Dr. Biggers. And he had all of these massive, beautiful pieces of art. And I bought this piece first, Shotguns. And he had another piece called Starry Crown. And I said, John, which piece should I buy? He had 5 pieces, right? He said, they're all good, Andy Moran. What are you talking about? They're all good. And I bought Shotguns. And he walked outside, and he saw my convertible triple black Porsche. He said, what are you driving this piece of crap for? You need to drive a Volvo wagon, okay? And sell
buy
that
some
piece
more
of
art.
crap and buy some more art. And I went home and told Mary Lou that, and she sold the car the next day. It was on a trailer, gone to New York, you know. And I ended up buying this piece, and we sold this piece 10 years ago for, it broke a record at Swan Gals for $250,000. And I didn't buy it for that appreciation at that time, you know.
Is it now at L.A. County?
I have no idea where it is.
I think that's.
I heard a
the
guy at
last
River Oaks
venue.
in Houston had bought it.
No, it's since then. It's
In
gone
LA
to-
County, yeah. So I got started with, okay, I got to Biggers, and then Dr. Biggers is so gracious. I was the first alumnus to ever purchase a piece of art from him.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
Wow.
When you think about in Third Ward today, there's so much art in our community, Albert, you know it, that we've never seen, that John Biggers literally came to you and say, I love you, and this is a gift.
That's true.
And that's what he did for Mary Lou and I, because I bought Shotguns from him. You know, it meant a lot to him that a student, and he actually came back to me years later, tried to buy it back. But he couldn't repeat it. He said, I can't repeat that piece. And he said artists can't ever repeat what
He's
they've done.
done
you know.
variations of it, but
Yeah,
that's
correct, right.
that's the classic.
So then Hudnall got to me. And Hudnall took me to Carroll Simms. Oh my God, when I saw what happened this week with Elizabeth Catlett's sculpture.
At the
Carroll
Swan
Simms,
auction.
yeah, Carroll Simms in 1949 at Cranbrook.
The first
African
African-American.
American. Thank you.
Graduate from Cranbrook.
And we've all
transferred
sat
from
down in that
Hampton.
famous Eames chair, Charles Eames chair. Well, Charles Eames graduated from Cranbrook. And we all know the Knoll Furniture, Knoll. She went to Cranbrook. But he was the first. And I went to his home, and he's playing Roland Hayes. Oh, my God, he's playing Roland Hayes, which Mary Lou's mother loved Roland Hayes, okay? So he's playing Roland Hayes scene. You know how Mr. Simms talk, that real southern drawl. Well, I heard you wanted to buy some of my art, boy, you know. And then he started telling me the stories about Jane Blaffer Owen and
The Three Marys.
yeah, right, yeah,
Allison
right,
Lefferville,
yeah. He started telling me the stories of all the people that supported
Mrs.
him.
Dumanil, Jane Blaffer Owen, and
Right,
I can't remember the third.
Miss McAshan,
Yes.
Susan McAshan. I never met her, but he talked about her all the time. That they supported him. And he brought out 10 pieces of his sculpture, and I bought them all. You know, I bought them all. And that's his thesis piece, Rachel Weeps for Her Children, 1949. 1940, and this is the same guy who did work with Elizabeth Catlett. They were friends like you and I. You know,
And he went to Cranbrook to study jewelry smithing.
Yeah,
That's
making,
really,
yeah,
mhm.
yeah. Yeah,
And-
yeah, he went to Kramer and he created these
Mhm.
massive sculptures, which you can all go see anytime you want, right on Texas Southern University's campus. So, you know, so Hudnall got me there, then I collected Hudnall stuff too, and then I got into an Edsel Cramer.
Edsel, I want to ask you about Edsel.
Yeah. What's the
So
question?
how did you encounter Edsel? Did you know him when he was alive?
Yes, I did. I knew Edsel through his art,
Mm-hmm.
but I also knew him through golf.
That's what I thought.
Okay. And he's got a funny story because Ty, my middle son, and Jason are both scratch golfers. Okay. They have taken a lesson one day at was it Herman Park? Herman Park.
Mhm.
And they're just, my wife had just paid for the lesson. My wife had a very southern drawl, very southern. And then she had just paid for the lessons for Ty and Jason. And Edsel's over there, well, let me show you how you work your grip. And Meredith said, well, Mr. Kramer, aren't you an artist? And I heard you're a very good artist. I just paid a professional to teach my sons how to play golf. Why don't you go home and paint? and it was and Edsel told me the story. He said, your wife dismissed me, you know. And
So
but-
let me interject.
yeah,
For those of you who don't know, I mean, the name John Biggers is very familiar in Houston. Edsel Cramer, not as much, but Edsel Cramer was he was in the same period as Biggers. He took a very different path.
correct.
He studied in Paris. He was a great portrait artist. The portrait of Barbara Jordan that's in the state capitol was done by Edsel Cramer.
Correct.
But he also did many, many portraits of African Americans in Third Ward.
Correct.
Everyone had a portrait.
Mhm.
But his favorite thing was golf.
Yeah, and it's a tragedy because Edsel, if you look at these portraits, this is like 1946. He was amazing, and he had a tremendous love for John Biggers. They were personal friends. And John, if Hudnall was here, he could reaffirm what I'm saying. Hudnall said, Andy, John would say, man, I wish I could paint like Edsel Cramer, you know.
I heard him say that.
Yeah, you say
yeah,
it last, so I
yeah.
now I know it. I got it from you and
Yeah,
Hudnall. That's
yeah.
the Bible right there, both of you guys.
What was that he said? I missed that.
Huh?
What did he say?
He said, I wish I could paint like Edsel Cramer.
In terms of likenesses.
Yeah,
and
yeah, just the way,
capturing, you know.
because he said Edsel did it so easily. You know, he did. You know, matter of fact, before he died, he did a sketch of me in my home. He died 2 weeks later. We were having a talk, just like we're doing right now, talking about art, and he did a little sketch for me. But Edsel used to come to me to pay off his gambling debts because he couldn't beat none of those guys on the golf course. Okay, I mean, he couldn't do it, and of course, he paid me back with art. Yeah.
Which was a good payment.
Yeah, right. But when I think about Edsel and look at how beautiful his stuff is, his portraits, and of course Barbara Jordan, I think he never got a show in Houston.
I know, and that's,
Never.
you know,
And that's
that's something that I want to correct.
Yeah.
It's on
I'd love to
on
help
my
you.
list.
Yes,
You know,
I
to
understand.
really do, because it's fascinating, and he was rediscovered by a later generation. You know, Edsel was a friend of my parents, and he would come over twice a year, and he'd take over my mother's kitchen and bake. And
Really?
it would take him 2 days, you know, to bake a pie.
Right. That's
He
funny.
did a portrait of me and one of my sisters.
Correct.
And as I said, you walk into so many homes in Third Ward, and you're going to see portraits by Edsel. And then generations later, he's kind of rediscovered, and you have another group like Annette Bracy, who has works of her children, and Gerald and Anita Smith. Cheryl Crusoe.
Mhm.
But later in his life, Edsel's eyesight was failing.
Right.
So he did these beautiful landscapes of golf courses.
Mhm.
And they're just quite extraordinary watercolors and washes
Right.
that Gerald and Anita have.
Yeah, I got a couple of them.
They so a part of what you are doing with this collection is really bringing a lot of the history of third ward culture together. So another kind of my question: who is it that you don't have in your collection that you would like to have?
I'd love to have a Barclay Hendricks. Actually, when I sold this piece at auction, Barclay was on the back. And his family called me and said, Mr. Moran, thank you. Because it was the first time his piece had reached a significant
Wow.
number.
Wow.
You know, because everybody was gravitating toward the biggers, but it helped his piece at that
Sure,
time, and his
yeah.
pieces have gone up tremendously. You know, but as I said in an earlier lecture, I don't chase artists. Every piece of art I've purchased was because I liked it initially. I remember when I bought Jade stuff when she first came out of college. I liked those were her, those two pieces in the corner back there, those two black and whites. So those were her
Jay,
college
can you wave
graduation
your
pieces.
hand or stand up so
This is
everyone
this
can
is
see
Jade Cooper back here in the
Cooper?
corner, and that's her work in the black and whites, and that's her work right here with the girl with the Guns N' Roses on right here. But everything was purchased out of something I liked. You know, I mean, gosh, when I bought this from Carroll Simms 40 years ago, even though I knew it was significant of 1949 in Cranbrook, but did I know Charles Eames went there? No, I didn't know all that then, you know, because I'm busy working trying to raise my kids, you know.
Right.
But as time goes by, we begin to study and read and constantly educate ourselves, constantly educate our collectors, you know, and you realize, damn, I got some nice stuff here, you know, that I really didn't actually see the aspirations. And any collector that purchased from me always knew, they say, oh, Andy Moran's high. Well, Andy Moran is high because I always felt our art was undervalued. So I did put a price. If you want it, you're going to pay for it, you know, if you want it from me. And when I remember when the Kermit piece finally traded over 110, 117, I called Nigel in New York. I said, Nigel, you got this piece priced way too low. I called Jerry. And she said, he won't take my phone calls. I said, well, tell him I said to talk to you. Jerry called him. And she finally talked to her. And he raised a little bit, but it still went way beyond his expectations. Because a lot of times I find that appraisers who look at our work don't really know what it's really worth. A very significant thing happened this week. Johnson Publishing Company sold all of their art collection to pay off a debt of something I heard was $2.7 million to Desiree Rogers that she had loaned the company. This auction
You
went.
all know Johnson Publishing Company?
This was Ebony and Jet.
Ebony Magazine. Desiree Rogers was the personal secretary.
Yeah.
Was that her role?
With Obama
With
at one time.
Obama's.
Yeah. But she was working for them. Anyway,
Right.
so all of this collection was sold. This was one of the finest auctions that I set through this past Thursday in my home. And I bid online, but they got out of my budget in terms of where I wanted to be. All of them were tremendously undervalued, okay? Which meant what? That appraisers just didn't really know what they were looking at, and these pieces went through the roof. Here's a piece by Robin Harper. Check the appraised estimate, $3,000 to $5,000. You know what it went for? 150 grand. This is a huge piece like Julian Kyle, okay, of Jack Johnson. Unbelievable. Carrie Mae Weems went for 250 grand, 7 photos. Now you got to think about the beauty of the Johnson family, that they were purchasing all of this art.
They started collecting in the 60s.
Yeah.
They were collecting
Yeah.
during the same time that they were putting on Ebony Fashion Fair.
Correct.
So, and that was Mrs. Johnson.
Mrs. Johnson?
That was Mrs. Johnson.
right.
And her vision and support of black artists.
I got to tell you this story here, on this piece here. Larry Erskine Thomas, which probably very few people here know who he is. When I was living in D.C. for 21 months, I worked in the Pentagon. I was in military intelligence, working in the Pentagon, top secret clearance, no uniform. I was in the last American draft during the Vietnam War. Across the hall from us was Larry Erskine Thomas, the artist,
Where you lived.
where we lived in
You and
D.C.
Mary Lou.
On, can't think, right down the street from Kennedy's, RFK Stadium. But anyway, Mr. Thomas didn't have any children, and he adopted Mary Lou and Yuri and myself. He and his wife, they were just lovely people. And I got a, when you walk in my house, there's a piece of Jesus with these little figures. Now, when I went through this book, I said, man, Larry Erskine Thomas, I definitely want to bid on that. And I told Heidi, I'm through buying art for a while. But I was just, you know, the way I'm calculating my numbers, if I can sell this over here, I can buy this, you know. And so I got numbers in my mind, what I'm going to sell, and I'm going to get this Larry Erskine Thomas. They had it estimated at $1,000 to $500, which is a joke.
1,000 to 5,000?
No, 1,000 to 1,500, I'm sorry.
Okay.
And I'm thinking, wow, man, I haven't seen Mr. Thomas. He died in '86. But I just kind of wanted a piece
Sure.
because I knew him personally. Lived right across the hall, you know, a little small apartment that we lived in. And I started bidding it, and they lost me at 15. You know, and it just kept going and going, and it ended up at $52,500. But think about the audacity of appraisers coming up with 1,000 to 1,500. It's kind of like, you know, when you bring out all this fine art, and I always say that while I'm here at Heidi Vaughn Fine Art, what you're looking at in my room, what I brought here, is fine art, okay? So whoever appraised these, you know, come on, man. I mean, something done in 1967? $1,500? Are you kidding me? This week, and I enjoyed being in the auction aspect of watching each item trade. Mm-hmm. And Swan's good at what they do, but they're getting competition now with Sotheby's after Charles White sold for $1.8 million. This was Dinga McCannon. It broke a record. It sold for $130,000. So the women had a great day. Ann Tanksley, she did, along with Carrie Mae Weems. And matter of fact, there were people clapping for her because she was in the audience. And Mr. Lowry, he said, "Will you guys stop clapping because if you hold your hand up, you got to buy the painting." You know, in the bidding process, because they're pretty intense in the biddings. I went to when I sold mine, and there's no nonsense, you know.
Right.
But back to the fact that we appreciate that Swan is there because they were the first to really specialize in African American art. Of course, then you had what recently happened, $1.8 million for the Charles White. And Charles White, it's in the Sotheby's, but Charles White also, John Biggers, they were personal friends. They all studied.
Well, he was his teacher.
Yeah, he was a teacher, right?
He was his teacher
Yeah, right.
at Hampton. And then, so there's like a line from, it's Charles White and Elizabeth Catlett at that time were married. And John studied sculpture with Elizabeth Catlett, and Charles White was his teacher and his mentor. He would go to New York, he said, and the two of them would be working in the studio, and he'd wash dishes and clean up for them so they could continue on. But he influenced Biggers so directly that John would say, you know, it took me a minute before I could get all those Charles Whites out my system, you know, because he was that, you know, powerful in his own manner of drawing and very self-assured. So I always look at Charles White to John Biggers to Harvey Johnson to Robert Pruitt, I'm just talking about TSU, just that
Yeah,
lineage, you
TSU,
know,
yeah.
because there were students in the building, like Andy was saying, there's just kind of a reverence. And Biggers would always talk about Charles White.
Right.
That's where he would start, so that there was this conversation about Charles White. I remember when, I don't know, Lehman, if you were on that trip when we went to Dallas, and Robert wanted to meet Elizabeth Catlett because she was married to Charles White. And I said, well, you may not want to have that conversation.
Who wanted to meet her?
But Robert Pruitt.
Oh, Robert
when he
Pruitt,
was a-
okay, yeah,
when he
you wanna
was a
get- who
student.
wouldn't want to meet
Could
Elizabeth
I
Catlett?
interrupt for a second?
Sure.
Since you're talking about Swan and talking about John Biggers, Charles White, all of these catalogs, Andy, could you tell us something about your thoughts on Kermit Oliver's painting at Swan, that auction, since talking about one of our own here?
Yeah, well, actually, as I said, I made the calls to Nigel and told him I'm insulted at the price that you have Kermit. Well, I go back to what she said too, maybe they do it low ball or whatever, you know. And a lot of times these galleries already have these things done too, where they're gonna go. They know who's in the room, and they know who's in the room and who's gonna buy. When that piece broke the 110 level, which is big for Kermit, but to me, to be honest with you, all of Kermit's works are going to exceed millions at some point. There's just no question about it. This piece that sold for $112,000 was sold at auction here in Houston. Right, Heidi? Yeah. It was sold at Heritage Auctions May 26 of 16 for $22,000. That's 4 years ago. Thank you. So when it broke the record at auction at 112, I'm like, finally, you know. And I think about the collectors in the room who have purchased Kermit Olivers from me. All of them.
Or just have collected Kermits.
Yeah, just collected Kermits. Yeah, any Kermit, any watercolor, drawing, anything by Kermit, it's great. But the real deal is, Susie, Kermit had never been to New York. Never been to New York, and that was important for someone to show his work in New York. Now, when you ask that question, I'm going to give you more. My piece back here is priced at $117,000. That's a gift for a piece done in 1972 during the period when Kermit was into Andrew Wyeth period. It's a gift. I'm going to even finish on that. I wanted to take it to auction. Well, Andy, it doesn't have an image. Excuse me? You hear that? It doesn't have an image. Oh, wow. So you're the protector of Kermit Oliver's now without an image? Well, Andrew Wyeth has tons of paintings with what? No image.
And what do you mean by that?
Yeah, what do you mean? I don't even go there with him, Alvin. I don't even want to talk about it. I don't even go there
Yeah,
with him. I just leave him
yeah,
alone.
yeah.
You know,
But-
like, you know, okay, but this is what I'm going back to. So-called appraisers, so-called authority.
So let me interject, and I don't know if you all know Susie Khalil, but she's currently writing a book on Kermit Oliver, so is very interested in what happened. And I have to say, when I saw that, the work that had gotten that price, I was very happy, and it did mean a breakthrough, and it did elevate Kermit, because he has for so many years been kind of a Texas artist, someone that just, you know, almost like a cult. Everyone here knows Kermit and his genius, but beyond Texas, you know, he doesn't get kind of the recognition that he should. So that was very important. But let me just ask you, and I have 3 quick questions, and we're going to open it up.
Okay.
So beyond, and I understand what you're saying about valuing our work, and as a collector being forthright about that responsibility. And part of it is educating others, because for so long it was the HBCUs that were carrying and protecting these works.
Right.
African American artists could not show at museums, so they showed at black colleges. So that was the part of the mission of all of these schools. Hampton, Texas Southern, Spelman, Clark Atlanta. Clark Atlanta has one of the most impressive collections of African American art in the country. So the next time you're in Atlanta, make it a point to go there. And that is a result of the fact that Hale Woodruff had a showing, an annual, where the prize winners would be paid for their works, and that became part of the collection. So as a result, you've got all these incredible, incredible works there, including Woodruff and White and Catlett, all these artists. But so what do you see, this is my last big question, what do you see as the further responsibility of collectors today beyond protecting the value of the works? What are the things that everyone in this room should be thinking about?
Well, I think I was discussing this with Susie earlier. When I was growing up, watching my little black and white TV in Pleasantville with my mom, and you'd always see produced by Quincy Jones, right? Orchestrated by Quincy Jones. Music score by Quincy Jones. And I never looked at Quincy Jones as a African American composer or orchestrator, you know. And so I thought about these artists and the frustrations that they may have felt, especially, there was a recent article in the New York Times. And I tell you guys, if you read the New York Times daily in the art section, it's scary what they have to say. Every day it's just great, every day. These are artists past 70, some of them doing abstract work in the 60s, like Norman Lewis, and they were told they were inauthentic. Well, what is inauthentic when you can be drunk like Jackson Pollock and beat your wife and throw paint on and get $50 million, right? Okay? What's inauthentic about, what is there to be?
So who told them they were inauthentic?
Some critics.
But that came from both
Yeah.
white and black
Yeah.
critics.
Probably,
I
yeah,
mean, no,
yeah, oh, yeah.
seriously,
Oh, yeah.
not probably, seriously.
You're absolutely correct, because you and I both know that Reginald Gammons was blackballed among his own little peer
Yeah,
group,
so
even
we
though he
have
was
to
a
be-
rebel, you know,
right.
in that situation, you know. But, oh, here it is right here. The white dealers, this is from, the white dealers would say that African Americans who did abstract work were inauthentic. I mean, so I remember when Karen Lewis came to my home to buy shotguns for me, and she cried in my living room for at least an hour about Mr. Moran. My dad has never really been accepted, Norman Lewis, you know. And she had a driver outside in a very cold day for 3 hours, and she offered me $100,000 for shotguns. And I walked out of the room, and Mary Lou told her, Andy's not coming back in the room. We appreciate your offer, but Andy's not coming back in the room. And you know what Mary Lou told her? But I wish you the best, and Mr. Lewis. You know, and finally Norman, and Karen was very nice, you know, but she was representing Michael Jordan at the time, and he wanted to buy that piece, but he didn't want to pay what I
The
wanted.
Michael Jordan?
Yeah.
He collects
Basketball
art?
guy. Basketball guy.
He collects?
I don't know. She was there with a $100,000
Just-
check, but it wasn't enough, you know. But anyway,
I'm
I
happy
look,
to
I
know
look,
that.
I look at. So I'm going back to Quincy as a composer, and I think about John Biggers, who was just giving away art. And I've had people come through here in the past week. It's interesting. I'm not even mentioning the name because the name is not even worthy of being mentioned in the category of these people who they'll ask me about, and I say I have no interest in them. You know, there's certain people who are anointed. And there's certain people.
Oh, you
with-
mean other artists?
Yeah, right. Certain artists are anointed, just anointed in the local community, all even across America. Certain artists, you know, and there's certain artists who have immense talent. But when we start with what happened in this room here, we start in this room with John Biggers, behind that counter. Joe Moran, my brother, who studied under Kermit Oliver. Edsel Cramer, John's one of his best friends. Carroll Simms. Oh my God, Carroll Simms.
Carroll Harris Simms, as he would want you
That's
to
right, he was
say.
one there. Carroll Harris Simms, who founded one of the greatest institutions in America, Texas Southern University Art Department. Trust me, it is. So we got Carroll Simms. Then we got Jade Cooper, a student of Lamont Green, Julian Kyle, and we got Earlie Hudnall in the back, a Smithsonian.
Who, by the way, has an opening from 2 to 4
He
downtown.
also has open today also. So, you
Part
know,
of his
I'm
photographs.
looking at, you know, I got to say this before we leave. Then we open up
I
for
got my
questions.
3 questions, Andy. I
Okay.
have to
Go
get
ahead,
them.
go ahead.
Because I know there is response from everyone. What was the last book you read?
What was the last book I read? Oh, Malcolm Gladwell, Talking to Strangers.
Which one? Okay,
Talking to Strangers.
okay,
I like Malcolm Gladwell.
all right, okay. Describe a perfect day for you.
Today's a perfect day. You know, right now, just to wake up and realize how beautiful life is. And I had a friend ask me the other day, Andy, you ever tell people you love them? I tell people I love them all the time. It's just certain love with certain, you know, different being in love, but if you love someone, you tell them you love them today. If I love you, I'm going to tell you I love you. You know, I mean it. I'm going to tell you I love you. You know, so
That's true.
I'm just glad to be here.
So, and this is my last question. These are questions I ask my students the first day of class, just to kind of pull them into a conversation. If you were going to have dinner with anyone in the world, nice leisurely dinner, who would that be?
My daddy.
All right.
And I'd like it to be with just him.
I hear you.
He's 93 years old.
I hear that.
Right.
I do. And
It'd
that's
be my-
another
it'd
generation.
be my daddy. But hey, before we open the question, I just want to read one thing, okay? And I got to read this because it's very necessary in terms of what we talked about today.
So,
Okay.
you got it.
Here it is. When I look at the appreciation of art values, and I've always placed my prices above whatever the so-called appraisers who normally doesn't even know what they're looking at. Yet when I purchased my art, I didn't purchase any of the pieces for appreciable value. I bought them for their intrinsic value that brought to me and my wife. Do you really think a Larry Rivers or a Robert Indiana was worth $50 million? And it took Norman Lewis 40 years to receive $1 to $2 million for his pieces. Is Jackson Pollock or Rothko as good a painter as Sam Gilliam or Bartley Hendricks? And furthermore, is Norman Rockwell as good as Kermit Oliver? And I love Norman Rockwell, but I also love Kermit Oliver. And we look at John Biggers and his depictions of Africa and American Negro life. Is Norman Rockwell any better of American life? So I remember living in the 70s and the 80s, and I always viewed, I talked about this earlier, Quincy as a composer and an orchestrator. I never viewed him as an African-American composer. So these young artists, some of them only want to be an artist, which in that period was really a form of arrogance, to be a free spirit, and to project images of strength in a period of such discrimination. So I think about John, and I see John as, I'm sure when they were drawing and creating all this great work, they were just being what they love to do. They were artists. We cannot say he's African American. He's an artist. So I want us to appreciate when you buy art, that look at the art. And if you love it, take it home. It'll make you feel good.
Thank you, Andy. And I want to thank you. Thank you especially for giving the great shout out to the tradition of Texas Southern. We have Lehman Green here, who's
Yes, thank you for coming out.
chair of the department. Jade Cooper, an alumna. Are there any other TSU art departments? But it's very important that we chronicle all of this, and I appreciate your passion and your candor and your discussion of some really, really major issues.
Thank you,
that
Alvia.
Continue to be. I enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it too, baby. Love you
Okay.
so much.
Love you too.
I love you.
One of the guests in the audience was the author Susie Khalil. She is writing a comprehensive book on Kermit Oliver, whose work is featured in this exhibition. The book is being produced by Hooks Epstein Gallery and published by Texas A&M University Press. All proceeds are going to an art scholarship fund at Texas Southern University called the Kermit Oliver Art Scholarship Fund.